Listen carefully, because I want to start with something most men have never actually been asked in this way. When was the last time you really thought about how you masturbate? Not how often, not whether you do it, but the actual way you do it, the pace, the pressure, the mindset behind it. Because here's the reality most people completely miss. Masturbation is not just a private habit for release, it is a form of training. Every single time you engage in it, your brain and body are learning a pattern. They are being conditioned to respond in a certain way sexually, almost like repetition in a skill. And if that pattern is rushed, uncontrolled, or careless, then over time you may unknowingly be training your system in the wrong direction. That can show up later as weaker erections, finishing too quickly, or feeling disappointed when you're with a real partner. Now, I want to be very clear from the beginning. I am not here to shame you or scare you. Masturbation itself is normal. It is natural. In many cases, it is even healthy. But the problem is not the act itself. The problem is how it is done. And today, I'm going to break down 3 very common mistakes that quietly damage erection quality, stamina, and sexual confidence, along with what you should actually be doing instead. Stick with me, because none of this is complicated. These are simple corrections, practical adjustments, but when applied consistently, they can completely change how your body responds. Before we go deeper, do me a quick favor. Hit the like button so this message can reach more men who actually need this kind of honest conversation. And if you feel comfortable, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It genuinely helps build this community. And of course, subscribe so you don't miss future straight-to-the-point men's health insights. Now let's slow this down and understand something important. A lot of people believe masturbation is just a quick release, a way to reduce tension and move on with your day, nothing more. But medically and neurologically, that's not the full picture. In reality, it functions more like practice. Think of it the same way you would think about training at a gym. If someone performs every repetition with poor control, rushing through movements without awareness, they don't build strength. They build patterns of weakness and inconsistency. But when movement is controlled, intentional, and focused, the body adapts in a very different way. It becomes stronger, more stable, more responsive. Sexual response works in a similar way. Your brain is constantly rewiring itself through a process called neuroplasticity. In simple terms, it learns from repetition. Whatever you repeatedly do becomes the default setting. So if your habit is fast stimulation, distraction, and urgency, your nervous system learns that this is the normal route to arousal and release. And later, when you're in a real situation with a partner, your body often follows that same learned script, even if you consciously want something different. This is why the goal is never simply to stop. The real goal is to train smarter. Now, for context, let me briefly introduce myself. I'm Dr. Jocelyn Carter, a urologist with years of clinical experience helping men rebuild confidence, sexual performance, and overall reproductive health. Over the years, I've worked with men in their 20s, 40s, 60s, and even 80s. And one pattern shows up again and again. Men coming in worried about finishing too quickly, men struggling to maintain erections when it matters, men feeling a disconnect between desire and performance. And what surprises many of them is this. Sometimes the root cause is not age, hormones, or disease. It is behavior. Repeated habits that shaped the response system over time. The encouraging part is that habits can be changed. And that is exactly what we are going to do now. We are about to go step by step through 3 of the most damaging masturbation patterns I see in men, and then I will show you exactly how to correct each one. Let's begin with the first one. Mistake number 1 is something I see in almost every case, and it's far more common than most men realize. It's what I call the rush pattern. This is when masturbation becomes a quick, almost automatic action. Fast, hidden, rushed, done with no real awareness or control. Maybe it started years ago when you were younger, always worried about being interrupted or caught. So your body adapted to speed. Finish quickly, get it done, move on. Or maybe it has simply become a habit in adulthood, a few minutes before sleep, a quick release before work, something squeezed into a small window of time. But here's what is actually happening underneath the surface. When your body is repeatedly trained to reach climax in a very short time, especially under 2 minutes, it begins to adapt to that timeline. Your nervous system starts to associate arousal with urgency, with speed, with immediate release. And over time, that conditioning can show up in real situations. Even when you want to last longer with a partner, your body may still follow the pattern it has been taught. And that pattern is finish quickly. Now, this is where things start to create a feedback loop. Because once a man notices he is finishing too fast, he often becomes anxious about it. He starts thinking ahead during intimacy. What if it happens again? What if I disappoint her? What if I lose control? That anxiety is not harmless. It activates stress responses in the body, especially adrenaline. And adrenaline is the opposite of what you want for strong, stable erections. It disrupts arousal, reduces control, and can make performance even less predictable. So now you have a cycle. Rushing leads to fast climax. Fast climax leads to anxiety. Anxiety leads to poorer performance. And poorer performance reinforces the fear. This is how a habit quietly becomes a problem. Now, I want to be very clear here. This is not about blaming yourself. This is about understanding how conditioning works in the body. Because once you understand it, you can reverse it. So let's talk about the correction. The solution is not stopping. It is retraining. You need to slow the entire process down and give your body a different experience to learn from. Instead of treating it like a race, you treat it like controlled training. You set aside time where there is no pressure, no urgency, no fear of interruption, just awareness. You focus on sensation rather than outcome, on control rather than release. One of the most effective methods I recommend is something called edging, and I want you to understand this clearly. This is not about frustration. It is about control training. You bring yourself close to climax, but you do not cross the point of no return. Then you pause. You let the arousal settle. You regain control, and then you build it again. Each cycle teaches your nervous system something important. It learns that arousal does not have to equal immediate release. It can rise, it can fall, it can be managed. That is how stamina is built neurologically. Over time, this creates a very different response pattern, one that is calmer, more controlled, more stable. And when that transfers into real intimacy, the difference is noticeable. You are no longer reacting automatically. You are participating with control. Think of it like physical training again. If you only ever sprint, your body never learns endurance. But if you train pacing, resistance, and control, your capacity increases. The same principle applies here. Now, there is something important I want to emphasize. Many men think the solution is try harder to last longer during sex. But that often creates tension, not control. True control is not force. It is training. And training happens outside the pressure of the moment. So if you only take one thing from this section, take this. Stop rushing the process, start retraining it, because once your body learns control instead of speed, everything else begins to improve naturally. Erections become more stable, confidence increases, anxiety decreases, and intimacy feels less like pressure and more like connection. Now let's move on to the second mistake, because this one is even more common in today's world, and it quietly changes the way desire itself works in the brain. Now let's move into the second mistake, and this is one I need you to listen to very carefully, because it is becoming more common than ever in modern life. Mistake number 2 is when porn becomes your default setting. Let's be honest for a moment. Porn is everywhere. It is easy to access, it is always available, and it creates instant stimulation with no effort required. And because of that, many men don't even think twice about it anymore. It becomes automatic, a quick habit, a shortcut to arousal. But here is what most people don't understand about what it is doing inside the brain. Porn is not just visual entertainment. It is a very powerful form of artificial stimulation. It constantly introduces novelty, new faces, new scenarios, new intensity, new stimulation patterns over and over again. And your brain, over time, adapts to that. It begins to expect high levels of novelty just to feel the same level of excitement. Normal, real-life intimacy starts to feel slower, softer, less stimulating in comparison. This is not about attraction disappearing. It is not about love fading. It is about conditioning. The brain becomes trained to respond strongly to screens, rapid novelty, and exaggerated stimulation. But in real life, intimacy is different. It is slower. It is more stable. It is based on connection, not constant change. And this mismatch is where problems begin. Some men start noticing that they can still get aroused with porn, but struggle in real situations. Others feel like their response is inconsistent, depending on the type of stimulation. This is where a condition often referred to as porn-induced erectile dysfunction can develop. Not because the body is damaged, but because the brain has been trained in a very specific way. It is like eating highly processed fast food every day and then suddenly sitting down to a balanced home-cooked meal. The food is not bad, but your system has become used to extreme flavors, high stimulation, and instant reward. So normal food feels less exciting at first. The same principle applies here. Now, I want to be very clear. This is not about guilt. It is not about labeling porn as good or bad. It is about understanding its effect on conditioning when used repeatedly as the primary source of arousal. So what is the solution? It is not just stop everything forever overnight. For many men, that approach does not work long term. The real solution is to retrain arousal pathways gradually. This means reducing reliance on visual stimulation and rebuilding sensitivity to natural sources of desire. That can include imagination, it can include memory, it can include emotional connection. Even slower forms of stimulation that are not constantly shifting and overstimulating the brain. What you are doing is restoring balance in the dopamine system. You are allowing the brain to become responsive again to normal levels of stimulation instead of needing extreme input. At first, this can feel different, even slightly uncomfortable, because the brain always resists change in the beginning. But over time, something important happens. Your response starts to feel more natural again. Attraction feels more real. Desire becomes more connected to emotion instead of just visuals. And most importantly, real-life intimacy starts to feel satisfying again without needing artificial intensity. So if the first mistake was about speed, this one is about stimulation. And both of them come down to the same core idea. Your brain learns from repetition. Whatever you feed it, it adapts to. So now the question becomes, what are you training it with? Because once you change that input, you start changing the output. Now let's move forward to the third and final mistake. And this one is often completely overlooked, even though it has a major impact on sensitivity and real-world performance. Now we come to the third mistake, and this is the one that most men completely overlook, even though it has a very direct impact on sensitivity, arousal quality, and real-life performance. Mistake number 3 is what I call the same grip, same pattern problem. At first, it doesn't seem like a big deal. In fact, most men don't even realize they are doing it. But over time, they develop a very specific routine. Same hand, same pressure, same speed, same angle, every single time. And this creates something we refer to in clinical terms as a conditioning effect on sensation. In simpler words, your body becomes used to one very narrow type of stimulation. The pressure is firm, the rhythm is familiar, the control is predictable, and your nervous system adapts to that as the normal standard for arousal. Now here is where the problem shows up. When you are with a partner, the sensations are completely different. There is variation, there is softness, there is unpredictability, there is less direct control. And suddenly, your brain may not recognize it in the same way. It is not that attraction is gone. It is not that desire is missing. It is that your system has been trained to respond to a very specific pattern, and real intimacy does not match that pattern exactly. This is why some men describe feeling like something is off, or that their arousal drops unexpectedly during sex, even when they are mentally interested. It becomes a mismatch between expectation and reality. And physically, this repeated single pattern stimulation can also reduce sensitivity over time. Because when pressure is always high and consistent, the nervous system gradually becomes less responsive to lighter or different forms of touch. This can make partnered intimacy feel less stimulating than expected, which then feeds into frustration, confusion, and performance anxiety. So again, this is not about damage, it is about adaptation. Your body learns exactly what you repeatedly give it. Now let's talk about how to fix this. The goal here is not perfection. The goal is variety. You want to break the single pattern conditioning and reintroduce flexibility into your response system. Start simple. Change the hand you use. Change the position of your body. Sometimes sit upright. Sometimes lie down. Sometimes adjust your angle. Even small changes like this begin to expand your nervous system's range of response. Another important adjustment is reducing excessive pressure. Many men use what is commonly called a death grip, meaning very tight, controlled pressure that is far stronger than what occurs during real intimacy. This is one of the biggest reasons sensitivity drops over time. So the correction is to use lighter pressure and more variation, sometimes slower, sometimes faster, sometimes more relaxed. And one very practical step that often helps is introducing lubrication during solo activity. This reduces friction and makes the sensation closer to real-life conditions, which helps retrain sensitivity in a more realistic way. Now, here is a bonus point that is often ignored but extremely effective. Practice with condoms during solo sessions. Many men report reduced sensation when using condoms during sex, but that is often because their body has never been trained with them. So, by occasionally practicing with different types, textures, and sizes, you reduce the shock factor in real-life situations. It becomes familiar instead of disruptive. What all of this does together is simple. It expands your sensory adaptability. Instead of your body relying on one fixed pattern, it learns to respond to multiple types of stimulation. And that is exactly what you want for real intimacy. Because real sexual experience is not repetitive. It is dynamic, it changes, it flows. So when your body is adaptable, your performance becomes more stable, your sensitivity improves, and your confidence increases naturally. Now, at this point, we have covered the three main mistakes: rushing the process, over-reliance on porn, and repetitive stimulation patterns. But the most important part is what comes next: how you bring all of this together into a simple approach that actually works in real life without overwhelming yourself. Now, let's bring everything together, because understanding the mistakes is only half of the process. The real transformation begins when you actually apply the corrections in a simple, realistic way. So here is the full picture. If you think about everything we discussed, all three mistakes connect to the same underlying issue. Your body and brain are not broken. They are simply trained by repetition. And whatever you repeat becomes your default response. So the solution is not shame. It is not panic. It is not forcing extreme changes overnight. It is retraining. Start with the first mistake, the rush pattern, because this is where most men are unconsciously stuck. Slow everything down, remove urgency, give your body time to experience arousal without pressure. Learn control instead of speed. Even small increases in time and awareness begin to reset your nervous system. Then comes the second adjustment: reducing dependence on high-intensity visual stimulation. This is about rebalancing your brain, not punishing it. When you reduce constant novelty and allow your mind to engage in more natural forms of arousal, something important happens. Desire becomes more stable. Response becomes more consistent. Real-life intimacy starts to feel meaningful again instead of muted. And finally, the third change: breaking repetitive patterns. This is where you restore flexibility. You introduce variation. You stop conditioning your body to one single script and instead teach it to respond to different sensations, different positions, and different types of stimulation. That adaptability is what creates real-world confidence. Now, I want you to understand something very important. None of this requires perfection. You do not need to fix everything at once. In fact, trying to do that usually leads to failure. What actually works is consistency in small adjustments. Pick one change, just one, and focus on it for a week. Then build from there. Because the human nervous system does not change through intensity. It changes through repetition. And over time, those small changes start to stack. Erections become more stable, anxiety begins to fade, control improves, and intimacy feels less like pressure and more like connection again. And if you are someone who has been struggling quietly with any of this, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not broken. You are not too late. And you are not alone in this. A lot of men go through the same patterns without ever realizing the cause. But once you understand what is happening, you also gain the ability to change it. This is not about chasing perfection. It is about restoring balance. It is about rebuilding confidence in your own body. And it is about making sure that your sexual health supports your life instead of creating stress in it. So take this as a starting point, not a final answer. Start small. Stay consistent. Pay attention to how your body responds. Because when you change your habits, your body follows. And when your body changes, your confidence follows. Now, if this video helped you, make sure you support it so more men can see this kind of honest information. Hit the like button, subscribe for more practical, science-based discussions like this. And I want to leave you with one final question. Which one of these three patterns do you recognize most in your own life? No judgment, no shame, just awareness. Because awareness is always the first step toward control. And from there, everything else becomes possible.